inside mosques. And I'm happy to follow up with specifics on those incidents.
I mean, I asked the question because you're hanging an awful lot on faith in this process. And for example, in the National Security Memorandum 20 report, you talk about being convinced by Israel's, quotes, credible and reliable assurances over this. I mean, there are two cases in which American citizens who have been killed at the hands of the IDF have had no meaningful accountability. So I think people will perhaps be puzzled by your belief in assurances in
so
that.
What we believe is that they have a process here. We're not making any lasting judgments yet as to what that process will yield because they're ongoing.
But these are ongoing. But there have been many in the past that have been ongoing and have reached no conclusion. And they also create a situation where you're able to get into a holding pattern and say, okay, there's an investigation going on, so we'll hold judgment.
But the alternative is to short-circuit an investigation and pass judgment in the middle of one, which also is not appropriate.
I'm not asking you to pass judgment on these current incidents. I'm saying, where is the evidence that there is meaningful accountability and the evidence that these things are prevented from happening, which follows up what Humaira was saying, on the basis of internal Israeli processes? Because a huge amount weighs on this now. The International Criminal Court, one of your objections to it is that they have an independent internal process. The ICJ, same thing. NSM 20, same thing. All of these incidents, you are hanging on a belief in that process being effective. And I'm asking you for the evidence that it is.
So let me just level set here in that Israel is a democracy that has prosecutors and independent judges who can, in the case of prosecutors, conduct investigations and make their own determinations about what is appropriate. I know you want me to. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I hate it when people do this. So let me take that back. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I know there is often a demand for us to try to jump to the end of an investigation. And I get the point you're making is different.
I'm asking for the evidence that these have been effective.
You cannot reach a conclusion about the results of these investigations in the middle of a conflict.
That's not what I'm asking.
But it is to have faith in the process. You have to have faith in. You have to be able to look at what the outcomes it has generated are.
But
and we're not at a place where you can do it.
This conflict is 100 years old. In its current form, it's probably 40, 50 years old. And when the IDF says that, or the internal system says there is a process of internal investigation, I'm asking you for some evidence that is effective, that it stops it happening again, that it creates accountability. And so, for example, in the last 2 years, with 2 American citizens who have been killed, there has been no meaningful accountability. When at the time, what the Israelis said was, there is an investigation, and you have relied on that as well.
So I just cited one case where there were officers who were disciplined for taking actions inside a mosque, and there are a number of those similar cases that have been publicly reported. But I do think that it is impossible to pass a full, lasting judgment on the process while you're in the middle of it. I get the point that you are making, but we're just not in a position to declare that all the investigations that Israel are conducting are sham investigations while they're ongoing. I don't think it's fair to do that. We would object if someone did that with respect to our military justice system while the investigations were ongoing. Now, if 6 months from now or 9 months from now or wherever we are at the end of this process or where a reasonable amount of time has passed and we are able to look at this and say there are investigations that have run their course where we think action was warranted and action has not been taken, we will be the first to say that publicly, and we will be first to hold Israel account. And you have seen us do that in other instances. For example, when it comes to violence in the West Bank, where we don't think Israel has taken appropriate actions to hold people accountable, we have taken our own actions to hold people accountable. And that's the standard that we will continue to apply.
I mean, what do you think of a military court system that in the cases of Palestinians that appeared before it, there was a 99% conviction rate? In the cases of Israelis that are held before separately, the civilian system, because they don't, in the same territory, have to appear before the military system, rights groups say that these are whitewashes, that there is no accountability or investigation.
I think I'm going to wait, as I said, to see the outcome of the investigations that are ongoing before I pass any judgment. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. 2 topics, Ukraine first, and I'll go back to your opening statement on Georgia as well. I want to get your comments on the latest state of latest offensive in Kharkiv and attack on the mall over the weekend. And in light of that, we've heard very credible voices from the allies, in terms of lifting all the restrictions on the weapons. NATO Secretary General said that it's time to do that. Baltic states say that it's time to do that. Poland says that, Britain says that, U.S. Congress says that, Helsinki Commission says that. Are they all wrong?
I will say that we continue to see, first of all, Russia launch intentional strikes on civilian targets. And unlike other conflicts where I think people will ask me questions about, the Ukrainian military is not embedding itself inside malls and schools and other civilian targets that the Russian military continues to hit. And so we will continue to support Ukraine by flowing weapons to the front lines. And you've already seen a number of drawdowns from the supplemental package. A great deal of that assistance has already reached the front lines. When it comes to our policy, I spoke to this last week, and the Secretary has spoken to this. Look, our policy has been that we don't encourage or enable strikes outside Ukraine's borders. But if you look at the broad sweep of our policy, we have made clear that Ukraine has no bigger supporter than the United States. And we don't just say that, we back it up with our military assistance, we back it up with our diplomacy in marshaling a coalition of more than 50 countries around the world to support Ukraine, and we back it up with the measures we've taken to hold Russia accountable.
Are you open for further consultations on this very topic? You know, Secretary's going to meet with NATO Secretary General.
Look, we always discuss with our allies and partners whatever is on their mind, and we have those meetings, but I don't have anything further to offer.
Thank you. Back to Georgia, on your opening statement, is it fair for us to expect more than just verbal condemnation? I know you just said that we're going to take action.
So Alex, well, hold on. The only reason I'm going to laugh is for weeks. Hold on, let me just, a rare interruption of the question. For weeks, you asked me that question. We announced a policy to impose visa restrictions last Thursday, and then today you're asking me if we are going to do more than verbal condemnation. When I think if I check the record, that's exactly what we did last Thursday. But sorry, go ahead.
To explain where I am coming from. We were told, for many years in this room that sanctions are meant to be, behavior change, to just encourage behavior change, not for punishment, right? I mean, I understand you said we're going to take action when we want, but I'm just failing to understand. If you're going to do it eventually, and the sanctions are meant to be to change behavior, why don't you just hurry up?
So we announced this policy on Thursday, so I know you want us to hurry up. I will also say that when we make further designations, those designations aren't public, so you won't necessarily know when we designate people with visa restrictions because they're confidential under federal law. But the visa restriction policy that we announced on Thursday is not the only thing that we have made clear could change as a result of Georgia's actions. As the Secretary announced on Thursday, we are conducting a comprehensive review of the relationship between the United States and Georgia. We provide Georgia $390 million of annual assistance every year for things like military assistance, economic development projects, building institutions, civil society. And we have to reassess all of that if the Georgian government is going to now regard the United States and other Western partners, not as partners anymore, but as adversaries.
There's another law that they passed today, the overrode, the president's veto, which is called offshore law. Do you have any reaction to that?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Offshore law. It's going to allow, the Georgians.
Separate apart from the one I'll have to follow up and get a reaction. Go ahead.
I got to ask about Iran.
Yeah.
There's reporting today or yesterday that the U.S. is urging allies, particularly the U.K. and France, to back off efforts to censure Iran at an upcoming IAEA meeting for fear that it could trigger some sort of reaction from Iran. Is there any accuracy to that reporting?
No, that report is not true. We have not lobbied any country to vote against or abstain from any resolution in that regard. We are actively increasing pressure on Iran through a combination of sanctions, deterrence, and international isolation to counter their destabilizing behavior and prevent them from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Janet, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. It was reported that North Korea launched a new military reconnaissance satellite shortly after the South Korea-Japan-China summit in Seoul, South Korea, but it exploded in the air. What is your comment on that?
So we condemn the DPRK's May 27th launch, which incorporated technologies that are virtually identical to those used in its unlawful ballistic missile program. This launch was in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. We have been in close consultation with our ROK and Japanese counterparts regarding the launch, and we urge all countries to condemn the DPRK's unlawful WMD and ballistic missile programs and press the DPRK to engage in serious dialogue, which to date it has refrained from doing.
But the common goal of denuclearization of Korean Peninsula was not included in the joint declaration of the South Korea, Japan, China summit. It is known that China has no intention of pursuing North Korea on the issue of denuclearizations. Can it be seen that China is tolerating North Korea's denuclearization?
So I will just speak for the United States and say that we have made clear, including in our direct engagements with the People's Republic of China, that we would welcome them playing any kind of productive role in countering the DPRK's unlawful weapons of mass destruction programs. We will continue to make that clear, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Taiwan,
Yeah.
as you're aware, China conducted the military drills around the Taiwan Strait and Taiwan itself. The Taiwanese president has suggested to China to, and I quote, share the heavy responsibility of regional stability with Taiwan. Do you think this is a good move on the part of Taiwan, and do you have any general comments on this suggestion?
I'm not going to speak to that in specific. I will say, with respect to the PRC's activities, we put out a statement from the Secretary on Saturday where we expressed our deep concern and said that we think the PRC should do everything to maintain stability and refrain from taking actions that increase destability across the Taiwan Strait.
All right, do you... somewhat on that. The PRC has argued that its position on the is based on United Nations General Assembly Resolution 2758. Deputy Assistant Secretary Mark Lambert's clarification, he made some clarifications in a recent event where he exposed the PRC's distortion of UN General Assembly Resolution 2758. Is there, what's the, does the resolution endorse China's sovereignty claim over Taiwan, and what's the distortion? Can you tell us?
No, it does not, and for any further further comments, let me take it back. I haven't seen Mark's comments, so let me take it back and talk to him.
Okay, one more, please. Again, Taiwan has been banned from attending the World Health Organization meeting this year. Whereas since 2009 to 2016, it did attend the assembly. On Friday, countries, including the U.S. and several others, issued a joint statement supporting Taiwan's participation. And Secretary Blinken has issued a statement saying that the U.S. supports is in line with Washington's One China policy. Do you have any further comments on that? Can you spell out the difference between Washington's One China policy and Beijing's One China principle?
So I don't really have any further comment to those two statements that we put out. Our One China policy has not changed. And we have made clear repeatedly that we think Taiwan should be able to participate in the WHO session, that we think that when they were a participant, they brought meaningful expertise that enriched the discussions there and the debates there, and we want them to be allowed to participate in future sessions.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. Speaking of the reactions to the conflict in Gaza, today Iraqi cleric Muqtada al-Sadr said in a statement that what Israel is doing in Gaza, they are doing with the support of the U.S. and U.S. president. And he asked the Iraqi government to shut down the U.S. embassy and expel the U.S. ambassador in Iraq. Do you have any concern or reaction to that statement?
So I'm aware of his comment. I will just say that we value our broad relationships, or broad strategic relationship with Iraq, and remain committed to working with the government of Iraq to expand opportunities for all Iraqis and support Iraq's security, stability, and sovereignty.
And what's your reaction to the recent attacks to the U.S. brands in Baghdad? They attacked the KFC, and also there were different attacks, which the Iraqi police says that this is anti-Israel motive behind these attacks.
So we are tracking those reports and obviously condemn the act of violence, and we welcome the statement by Iraqi authorities that they are investigating the attack and want to see them fully do so.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Matthew. What is Secretary Blinken's goals at the NATO foreign ministers meeting?
So we did a call on that last week where we outlined what we intended to cover at the NATO foreign minister meeting. The Assistant Secretary for Europe, James O'Brien, discussed that, and I will refer you to the transcript for a kind of full elucidation of the trip's goals. But I'll say in general, this is one of the It is the last meeting of foreign ministers before the Washington summit in July. So it will be making the final preparations for the summit, including talking about our broad support for Ukraine.
And what consequences could the U.S. impose on Israel for the bombing in Rafah?
I have spoken to that, I believe, at length already.
Okay. And how does the U.S. feel about Israel taking responsibility for the bombing in Rafah? Is it sufficient?
Is it sufficient? Again, I think I spoke to that at length and to a number of questions already. So go ahead.
Thank you.
A thorough joint investigation by German-based DW and Sadet and Sweden-based NATO News revealed that former and current members of the Bangladeshi Death Squad Rapid Action Battalion routinely get deployed as UN peacekeepers. Since the U.S. sanctioned RAB for gross violation of human rights, how concerned are you that its officers are being deployed in UN missions that the U.S. funds significantly, around 27% fund contributing by the U.S. from the taxpayers' money?
So we're aware of these reports. Peacekeeping operations play an essential role in promoting international peace and security, and it is essential that peacekeeping personnel protect human rights. In accordance with the UN due diligence policy, the UN relies on troop and police contributing countries to self-certify that they are not sending troops or police who are implicated in committing human rights violations or violations of international humanitarian.
Following recent revelation of the immediate past police chief's massive corruption in Bangladesh, who is subject to 2 U.S. sanctions, could you tell us whether any U.S. agency has found any of his assets stashed in the U.S. or any other country, and whether the U.S. has frozen such assets? Similarly, do you have any findings about corrupt former Army Chief General Aziz, as you imposed visa restriction recently? Will you take any action against the regime's top leadership, essentially from where these individuals are getting a free pass to do anything or everything?
So with respect to the first question, I don't have anything to announce. With respect to the second, I'm aware of the allegations and the media reports that you referenced. We've been quite clear that we believe corruption saps economic growth, hinders development, destabilizes government, and undermines democracy. We have made anti-corruption a core national security interest since the outset of this administration, and our detailed implementation plan for this strategy has been articulated at a number of senior levels, but I don't have anything new to announce, and as you know, we never preview sanctions or other actions that we might take. Go ahead, and then we'll come to Ellen, and then we'll wrap. Go ahead.
Just a quick one on Gaza. Do you have reports saying on Gaza and specifically humanitarian aid and specifically on the pier? The reports saying that the U.S. has suspended aid because the pier broke down or what have you. I don't have the details on it.
Yeah, so I know that there were some issues with due to the weather over the weekend. I know the Pentagon has a briefing this afternoon, and I'll leave it to them to speak to that. Ellen, go ahead, and then we'll wrap up.
One of my questions was his, but I wanted to ask, what's the situation with the humanitarian groups not being able to access aid from Kerem Shalom? They say it's too dangerous for them to. Could you discuss the situation in general?
It is something that we continue to work through with the United Nations and with the government of Israel and with the IDF. It's related to these questions of deconfliction coordination that we have been working through, that the Secretary discussed on our last trip. There are a number of things at play here. One, we've seen kind of improvements in deconfliction coordination, but sometimes that's been tough to communicate down to the unit level, which goes to the question of these groups being able to travel to a checkpoint and then actually make it through a checkpoint and not sit at a checkpoint for hours when you expose yourself to potential harm. But then the other thing I'll say is that for a number of days, we weren't actually even getting humanitarian assistance to Kerem Shalom because of this issue with it being stopped in Egypt. We've now seen it flow, and so we tend to work these things kind of we're always working on all of it, but as you get humanitarian assistance into Kerem Shalom, then have a much greater need to kind of break down those barriers to delivery, which we're actually working on. Go ahead.
Can I finish on Turks and Caicos?
Sure.
I know this came up a couple of days ago, but some Americans, I believe 5, have been arrested there for what they say is mistakenly bringing ammo to the island. They face a minimum of 12 years sentence for that. I think one was freed today with the suspended sentence. Some members of Congress are pushing the State Department to change the travel advisory. Is that anything that's under discussion?
So I'm never going to preview changes to a travel advisor or even talk about whether something is under discussion or not. But I will note that our travel advisory to Turks and Caicos does make note that people should be aware of local laws, which would, of course, prevent people from landing themselves in this situation in the first place. So we do encourage all Americans to check our travel advisory to Turks and Caicos or any other country that they might be visiting, because it does contain important information that is important to their safety and their well-being. With that, we'll wrap for today. Thanks.